Hey y'all, so back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about Spiral. You've already seen a fair amount of deep dive. She has some really cool stuff going on, and she has 6 arms. Let's get right into it. So, survivability, I think this was supposed to say 3.5. Maybe there's a smart aleck joke in there somewhere that I'm missing, but I think this is about fair. Spiral doesn't necessarily have any true degen, but her dancing blades come close to the function of an auto block mechanic as far as rescuing her from being comboed, and she has really solid block regeneration, not penetration, really solid block regen, and those two together definitely add up to just being a little bit above the average for survivability. For damage of 4, this is kind of going to depend on the tempo of the fight, right? Because if you can keep the tempo up, I think she's probably more like a 4.5, but she's very tempo dependent, and so if things are getting in your way, she can easily feel like more like a 3. All told, I think 4 is probably about fair. Ease of use 2.5 is probably also fair. There are definitely tools in her kit that are designed to make her more palatable, but the core ask of her playstyle, essentially being a portable mixmaster node, takes some getting used to, and is definitely going to ruffle a few feathers. It's not going to be for everyone. That said, you can make progress by hitting into block and alternating things that way, and it is a challenge that is worth at least tackling for a while to see if you can overcome it, because the rewards are very real. Utility of 4, she doesn't counter everything, but what she counters really matters, and we'll get into that as we go. And then defender strength of 3, there's not a whole lot going on here. She makes things like hazard shift more dangerous because of her fervors, and her dancing blades, like I said, can be a problem if you're not careful. They can stun you and then you get hit a lot, but you can also play around them. It's just going to take a little bit more time, so she is more of an annoyance than a real threat. So, strengths and weaknesses are going to be a little bit difficult to really get into here because so much of it depends on things we are going to read elsewhere in the kit, so I'm going to kind of skim through. But starting with Dancing Blades, this is a new unique mechanic. She summons these dancing blades, she throws them at the opponent, they give her new openings. That's brand new. And then while they are active, she also gets other benefits from them. So this is a huge part of her kit. She's specifically much better when the opponent has a power gain buff, so that's very good for, Serpent. Not great for Arcus for reasons that we'll get to. She doesn't really counter the Cold Snap. But somebody like Hyperion, not bad. Anybody with power gain, she's going to be that much better against. And then she has a very high fervor potency, which means that specifically when it comes to her ruptures, she basically just ignores ability accuracy reduction. They're going to happen as long as the opponent isn't immune. And that also extends to other damaging effects, whether that's from an incursions hack as an attacker or some kind of hazard shift node as a defender. So be very careful with that stuff. Weaknesses, we kind of already alluded to this. Tempo is incredibly important for her. If there's something getting in the way of her tempo and her utility doesn't answer it, she's probably not going to feel very good. Her damage is very dependent on stacking a bunch of ruptures on the opponent. Think kind of like Tigra. And so if those ruptures don't stay on the opponent, she's going to have a bit more of a time. That said, her special 3 is an alternate, but it is tuned a bit lower. And then Power Steal immunity. Spiral does not have access to Mystic Dispersion in the traditional sense, which means that her power gain is tuned very much around landing her power steals. If that doesn't happen, she kind of falls apart. So don't use her against the 4 characters with power stealing, which is another reason that I wouldn't use her against Arcus, because he punishes power steal. Anyway, moving on to the actual abilities, we start with Deadly Dancer here. Spiral's magical and martial mastery grants her immunity to Falter, which, as we've seen with Prowler, comes up quite a bit with nodes and also, of course, Ebony Maw, and increases the ability accuracy of stun effects by 100%. Most notable that this allows her to get around certain kinds of disorient effects and allows her to parry Adam Warlock when he has his sovereignty buff up. There are a number of other places that this is helpful. Generally, more reliable parries is a good thing. All of Spiral's weapon attacks have minus 20% offensive combat power rate and a 1% chance to inflict a rupture debuff over 10 seconds. These ruptures are paused during her special attacks. So fairly standard Mystic stuff, gains less power from attacking, and benefits from frequent specials because remember, like any other damaging effect, the damage for these ruptures is calculated as though they lasted 10 seconds. Any pause beyond that, any additional ticks you get is just free damage on top of that. When a personal rupture would be inflicted on the opponent if they are not at max power, Spiral power steals 1% of their max, increased 3% flat while the opponent has a power gain buff. So a couple important clauses there. Would be inflicted means that this does happen when the opponent is rupture immune. It's just checking for, hey, are we about to try and inflict a rupture? Cool, time to power steal. And then that 3% flat means that that 1% becomes 4% when the opponent has a power gain. So 4 times as strong, right? An alternative way to write that would have been increased by 300% and not have had the plus or the flat there, just so that people follow. But 1% and 300% in the same line tends to be a little confusing. So that's why we have that plus 3% flat. Now, moving on, for each buff on the opponent, Spiral's personal rupture potency is increased by 10%. So buff-heavy cosmics are going to take more damage. Like we said earlier, Spiral does not benefit from the Mystic Dispersion Mastery. Instead, her personal ruptures gain an additional second for each rank invested, which is, of course, a benefit for the Mystic Dispersion Mastery, but she doesn't benefit directly from it. Y'all know what we mean. So this does mean you generally want to run her with 5 points in Mystic Dispersion, because that is 50% more rupture duration, right? 10 all the way up to 15. That is 50% more time for you to get to another special attack, throw it, pause them, then get to another special attack, throw it, pause them. And so it can end up giving you significantly more than 50% more damage, especially when we get to later on in the kit and you see why you want those ruptures to stay on the opponent. Next section. Each time Spiral performs a light, medium, or heavy attack, dodges back, or blocks any attack, if it's not the same action as the one out of these 5 performed previously, she gains a 600% Fervor passive for 13 seconds. So the important thing there is that she's not going to penalize you for other actions, but switching these up is important, right? Like I said, it's kind of like portable Mixmaster. You can also think of it as the tunnel vision node or how Sentinel builds analysis charges. It's not nearly as punishing as those, but to build up these fervors, you want to mix things around. You can do medium, light, medium combos after parries. That's 4 different mechanics in a row. If you mix in some dodges and blocks of special attacks, that works. Heavies help out. I also really want to point out this does not require the attack to hit. You can dodge back, throw a light attack. Best case, your opponent runs into it, and now you can do a light, medium, light, and dodge back again. Repeat that again, or you can dodge back and do light, medium, right? The point is there are a lot of ways for you to very quickly gain a lot of fervors once you really understand this system. But you can also, like I said, parry light, medium, parry light, medium, and do nothing else and ramp pretty quickly. Like I mentioned earlier, you can also do medium light into block as well as the air, which is a pretty safe way of ticking up those fervors. Now, the reason that these are 600% fervors is because, as you remember earlier, Spiral's chance to rupture is only 1%. So this is a non-flat increase, which means that a single 600% fervor takes that 1% to 7, right? If you have 4 of those, then that 1% is increased by 2,400% to 25%. If you have all 15 of these, you're looking at a 9,000% increase, at which point that 1% is increased to 91%, meaning that most of your weapon attacks, which is all of your basics, most of your special 1, and a little bit of your special 2, are going to proc a rupture, right? So you really want to get to 15. Even if you're not at 15, you want to keep your fervor count high, because that's going to mean dramatically more ruptures. Fervors are paused during Spiral's special attacks, so you don't have to worry about that, and while the opponent has a power gain buff, so another benefit of the opponent having power gain. Fervors are also paused for 10 seconds when you reach that stack limit of 15. And that's very important, because that means whatever you're doing with your combos, however you're ramping your fervors, once you get to 15, you have 10 seconds of doing whatever the heck you want, right? You can just do medium, light, 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 medium. Not worry about dodging back multiple times, not worry about blocking full combos. You can do whatever you want for that 10 seconds and get the full benefit of all 15 fervors. When the pause expires, you lose 10 fervors, but you can still gain fervors while they're paused. This is a really, really important part of this ability, because it's very tempting to see this as, okay, the 15 goes down to 5, and then, they expire and I start over. But the thing is that the 5 can easily be at full duration and have not ticked down at all if you gained 5 more fervors during that 10 seconds, which is pretty trivially easy to do, right? It's easy, but it does require you thinking about it just a little bit, and so that's why I call this out. During that 10 seconds, I would try and proc 5 more fervors, because then it's going to be that much easier to get back up to 15 from 5. Additionally, this pause does not expire while fervors are paused by something else. So, if the opponent has that power gain buff, or if Spiral's in a special attack, you don't have to worry about suddenly dropping from 15 down to 5 fervors, because that would be very painful during the special 1. Like I said, has a lot of weapon attacks. So, Spiral also gets a small amount of energy and physical resistance for each fervor she has gained without repeating an action. This resets when she does repeat an action, so I wouldn't really worry about this too much. But it is a nice little benefit for while you're ramping up your fervors. If you do manage to do it perfectly, you are going to be a little bit tankier on the way. This also does help her just a bit with taking Hazard Shift, which she can do via her SIG. So keep that in mind as we go, but also don't really worry about it. It's more a dopamine hit for that purple number ticking up than it is a real ability that you should try and lean into. And then lastly for this section, fervors expire 100% faster for each one past the first 2, gained without making contact with the opponent or without blocking. And this is just to make sure that you can't, as some of you may have seen people already start to do, this is to make sure you can't get all 15 fervors up by dash back light, dash back light, dash back light, dash back light, and just whiffing into the air without ever coming close to your opponent. Right? Because if you can manage to force the AI to freeze up a little bit and give you time to do that, you could theoretically get to 15 very quickly with no risk taken and no real work. And that's not the point of this ability, right? The point of this ability is for you to dance with the opponent. It's a martial dance. That's Spiral's whole thing. We do want you to actually fight. So that is why that ability is there. Very important to keeping her from going completely nuts. So next section's pretty short. Before the opponent lands an attack, so similar timing to Sigil Witch, Spiral's mystical weapons have a 100% chance to destroy one of each Fury, Precision, Unblockable, Death Immunity, Immortality, and Indestructible buff on the opponent, replacing them with Rubble buffs lasting 45 seconds. So you're probably never going to get 6 precisions in one blocked attack, but it is theoretically possible if the opponent has 1 or more each of all 6 of these kinds of buffs. But more realistically, you could very easily get 3 or 4, depending on Fury, Precision, etc., right? This is a very powerful ability. I already mentioned Sigil Witch. Like with her, because this happens before the attack lands, you can block unblockable with this as long as that unblockable is coming from a single unblockable buff. Additionally, this is obviously very good for Serpent because of his giant fury being a huge part of his damage, and because of how his death immunity works. Blocking it and turning it off while you have his regen pretty much completely zeroed out by a dozen ruptures is a very effective way to end the fight, as you've probably already seen in the deep dive. Additionally, because this is a destroy and not a nullify, you can do this to Hulkling and not worry about it turning into a passive. So, for Spiral's special attacks, you'll note that this is a shared header. Her special 1 and 2 don't have separate headings, so pay very close attention to this one. Beam hits in the specials gain attack rating for each rupture on the opponent, increased by 30% for each bar of power spent, so the beams in the special 2 get more attack rating because you're spending more power. And then after them, Spiral summons her Dancing Blades for 10 seconds per bar of power spent, paused during special attacks. So again, a benefit for pausing special attacks. But now we need to get into what exactly Dancing Blades do. So against non-science opponents, while they're active, Spiral's not struck by attacks while dodging backwards, so she has a dex replacement and can dex Serpent specials. And precision she would gain from the Dexterity Mastery are instead granted to the opponent, where you can then destroy them by blocking. Just to really underline this, because some of you may be wondering, why do I care about getting rid of the opponent's precisions when I gave them those precisions if I don't benefit from Mystic Dispersion, right? That's going into my rupture duration. And the reason, remember, is that Spiral's ruptures deal more damage when the opponent has more buffs. And so by replacing those precisions with harmless rubble buffs, you're getting extra rupture potency without any risk. Next bullet, while Spiral is not blocking an attack or stunned, Dancing Blades can be fired as a single projectile when she's struck by a light attack 2, or when you swipe up while holding block. So this is kind of a complex string, but like it says, you can't be actively blocking an attack, and you cannot be stunned, but at any other time you can fire this on your own by swiping up while you're holding the block input, or just when Spiral's struck by a light attack 2. This is the part that I said it kind of functions similar to an auto block, where one way or another, your opponent's no longer going to be hitting you after those blades hit them, right? As long as they're not stunning you. When the opponent's struck by Dancing Blades, they inflict a stun passive for 2 seconds, and a pretty chunky vulnerability debuff for 10 seconds. That vulnerability debuff is going to reduce both physical and energy resistance, remember, allowing your ruptures to do more damage over time, and your big hits during your specials that are gaining all that extra attack for each rupture on the opponent to also do more damage. If the blades strike either the opponent or their block, then Spiral triggers her Destroy, and so you get rid of Death Immunity, Fury, the whole list, right? But 2 separate triggers there. The stun and the vulnerability actually require them to land, the Destroy does not. And then as an attacker, Dancing Blades can't be fired for 2 seconds after being summoned by the special attack 1. Gonna be completely transparent here, that is because otherwise the extra control they give you over the fight when combined with her power gain and strikers would just be insane. The opponent would not get to play the game, and that is not what we are trying to do here. And then for the special 3, it's mostly the same as the others, except that it gains attack rating based on fervors on Spiral instead of ruptures on the opponent. On to the signature ability, while Dancing Blades are active, Spiral regens up to 60% of damage taken from blocked hits. So this is yet another reason to have the blades up. You get a dex replacement, you get this weapon somewhere down the line, but until you're ready to throw the weapon, you also block much better. Between the two of these, this is obviously very good for Serpent, but it has a lot of applications. This also can let you block a big ol' special from Maestro while he has his Pierce and Furies up and not really care about it, etc., etc. And then for each Fervor on Spiral, the durations of incoming Shock, Incinerate, and Poison debuffs are reduced by 10%. Obviously, this has a cap of 150% in case those durations are being increased by something. But for the most part, this means that if you have 10 Fervors up, Spiral is close to immune to these 3 debuffs, because they will just instantly go away before they can do damage. Like I said earlier, her energy resistance can help with the Shock and Incinerate. Poison, not so much. But Spiral is a very real option for Hazard Shift, especially against Cosmics, where it's easier for her to keep her Fervors up, including, obviously, Serpent, but definitely not limited to him. This is also one of those places where it's very important to remember that Spiral can ramp her Fervors into the air or into block. You can get up to 10 if you're careful before ever hitting the opponent and take no damage from these. In my experience, the tempo of the fight often means you get to, like, I don't know, 6 into block, and then you start, doing shortened combos and risking those debuffs, but that's generally worth it. Something to experiment with. It's going to depend on the opponent. It's also worth calling out that this is active as a defender, so I would be careful using somebody dependent on Shock, Incinerate, or Poison to attack Spiral, because, like I said, she's not the most spooky defender, but she does slow things down a bit, and she does gain Fervors on defense, so this is a real thing that can happen. And moving on to Synergies, we have one with Mojo and Longshot, of course. Spiral regenerates 1 health for every Fervor she's gained consecutively, up to 50. This actually does turn into a fair amount of health if you really hold on to it for a long time, because you can get up to 50 health per hit for every single weapon, and that basically can turn into getting doubled willpower. Because remember, hits usually land more often than every second. Spiral has a triple first medium. If you're on top of this, it can meaningfully heal you. You're just jumping through a very small hoop that is probably on fire to do so. Good hunting. For Mojo, prompts expire 5% more slowly for every 1,000,000 followers. It's just really good for Mojo. He can get up to a lot of followers, and this doesn't necessarily make him stronger or anything, because if you've played a fully ramped Mojo, he doesn't need it. But this does make you significantly less likely to have to reset and drop much lower, lose your fury, lose your haters, anything like that, because you are less likely to fail the prompts, and you have more time to get to the heavy or to the specials to pause or reset the prompt if you think you can't complete it, and that is really, really big for his playstyle. Longshot, the first hit of his heavy attack, disables his special 3 until the heavy finishes, which means that if Mystic Dispersion sends you red, nope, you actually still have access to the Incinerate and the Fate Seal. This is incredibly powerful. Of course, once triggered, this disabling is disabled until the special 3 is used. So it can only save you every other time that you go red to prevent some truly absurd shenanigans. But if you've played Longshot, especially if you have a high sig Longshot, this is plenty good, right? The way this normally plays out as somebody with a rank 3 7-star Longshot, the way this normally will play out in a fight is you'll be nullifying buffs off the opponent one at a time. You'll pretty easily get up to 2 bars of power. Maybe they have some bad karma on them because you nullified and or you threw heavies. You throw the special 2, they have a bunch of buffs on them. They all get nullified, you go red. And now you gotta wait, right? This just slows you down. You do a bunch of damage, but you probably don't quite kill depending on the fight. Now you gotta throw the special 3 and then get all the way back up to the special 2. Not with this synergy. You can throw 2 special 2s in a row, and that's very, very good. Next up with Lady Deathstrike, we have the Body Shop. Precision Spiral grants to the opponent can now stack up to 2 times, allowing her to block twice, convert both of them into rubble, and just get her ruptures stronger that much more easily. And for Lady Deathstrike, while the Nanobot's Regenerator is active, she gains immunity to degen debuffs, which is not super important, except that it restores her ability to take Mr. Sinister, because Lady Deathstrike has Rupture immunity, because that used to be relevant for Sinister. He got buffed. This lets her take him again. Mr. and Mrs. X with Rogue and Gambit, Spiral gets immunity to reverse controls. Simple, good. For Rogue, the opponent starts the fight with an indefinite precision buff. It's pretty junky, which means that if you steal it with the special 1, you're critting a lot more. Even if you have no other synergies, I believe that allows Rogue herself to then, quote, crit, not really, more often on the lifesteal and the power steal she has on her special 1 and special 2 respectively. Very good for her. And then for Gambit, while a precision is active, gain extra block proficiency, basically allowing you to do your whole heavy charging, block charging thing. And as long as you put a little bit of skill into it, you can charge it more safely because you block better. With Apocalypse, Cable, and Strife already a very strong team, adding Spiral to that gives everybody extra duration on their damaging effects. It's only 2 seconds, but that's another 20% on Spiral's base. It makes Apocalypse that much easier to hold on to. It makes Cable's degens that much longer, gives him that much more damage. Both of those characters have pretty long effects, so I won't overstate it. But for Strife, having that shock active for longer is very, very good. If you've played much Strife, you know that it is quite easy for the opponent to just kind of wait out that shock passive, and then you got to stop chaining special 2s, and you're just inconvenienced by having to throw another special 1 before you can really start doing the damage. Spiral makes that easier. And then with Jubilee, Sunspot, Psylocke, Storm, and Wolverine, we have some pretty generic ones for X-Men flavor. And that is Spiral. There are a lot of nuances to this character. I think I went over a lot of them, but there's also just a lot of stuff to discover. She has a completely unique moveset with a single triple medium, and the other hits of her basics are all single hit. She has very long, interesting specials. She has the Dancing Blades. She expands the Destroy mechanic that Destroyer started. Very, very interesting character. Very powerful character. Excellent answer to Serpent as advertised, but also to Hazard Shift, which is something that Mystics still struggle with a little bit. If you haven't already tried to get your hands on her, keep an eye out for your next chance. And until next time, thanks so much for watching, and take care.